I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I've been married to my husband, Andrew, who's 32, for 2 years now. We've been together for 6 years total, and for the most part, our relationship is strong. Andrew is kind, supportive, and someone I truly feel lucky to have in my life. But there's one area of our lives that has been a constant thorn in my side: his family. From the very beginning, they've treated me like I didn't quite belong, and over the years, it's only gotten worse. The first major red flag came during our wedding. Like many brides, I had spent months planning every detail to make the day special, but Andrew's family seemed to think it was their event to plan. They were insistent on including certain traditions that didn't align with what I had envisioned. I compromised at first, thinking it was important to keep the peace, but things spiraled when they decided to switch the catering I'd chosen without telling me. Imagine showing up to your wedding and realizing the menu is completely different from what you'd planned. Andrew tried to smooth things over, but it was clear his family didn't care about my feelings. That was only the beginning. After we got married, the comparison started. Andrew's family had always been close to his ex-girlfriend, Claire, and they weren't shy about reminding me. Claire was like a daughter to us, they'd say, often in front of me. They'd bring up her accomplishments, her cooking, or how she'd been so involved in family traditions. At one point, I even overheard Andrew's mom telling a relative that Claire would have made a better fit for their family. Holidays became another battlefield. Andrew's family had an unspoken rule that every single holiday, no exceptions, had to be spent with them. When I suggested alternating between our families or hosting something at our house, they acted like I'd suggested canceling Christmas. My family was quietly hurt, but they didn't want to cause drama, so I kept going along with it to avoid rocking the boat. Every year, I'd watch my parents celebrate without me, knowing I was missing out on my own traditions. The name drama started when I decided to keep my maiden name after getting married. I wasn't making a statement or trying to upset anyone. It just felt like the right choice for me. But Andrew's family wasn't having it. They ignored my decision completely, addressing me with Andrew's last name at every opportunity. Cards, invitations, even place settings at family events, they all had his last name on them. When I gently corrected them, they'd brush it off as habit or claim they'd forgotten. The exclusion became more blatant over time. Andrew would get invited to family group chats, vacations, and outings, but I was always left out. I found out through a mutual friend that the family had taken a beach trip and hadn't even mentioned it to me. Andrew didn't see it as a big deal, saying they probably assumed he'd tell me. But the pattern was clear. I wasn't part of the family. Then there was the dinner. A few months after we bought our first home, Andrew's parents invited us over for a family meal. I thought it might be a good chance to bond, but instead, I spent the night listening to them loudly praise Claire. She used to make the best lasagna, Andrew's mom said, glancing at me like she expected me to take notes. Later, they casually implied that Andrew must have paid for our house on his own, since I wasn't contributing enough financially. For the record, Andrew and I both work full-time and share expenses equally, but that didn't seem to fit their narrative. The pressure to have kids started not long after that. Every conversation seemed to circle back to when we'd start a family, and it didn't matter how many times I said we weren't ready. To them, it wasn't a discussion, it was a mandate. But when I pushed back, I was accused of being selfish or too focused on myself. Andrew tried to buffer the conversations, but his approach was always the same: keep the peace. The breaking point came during a weekend visit to their house. I was in the kitchen when I overheard Andrew's mom talking to someone on the phone. She referred to me as just the wife, as if that was all I'd ever be to them. It stung, but it also lit a fire in me. I realized I'd spent years trying to fit into a mold I was never going to fill. My own family had been a constant source of support through all this. They encouraged me to stand up for myself, reminding me that I didn't owe anyone my silence. When I brought it up with Andrew, he promised to handle it, but nothing ever changed. That's when I decided I was done bending over backward. A close friend suggested giving his family a taste of their own medicine, and honestly, the idea stuck with me. If they couldn't respect me as part of the family, maybe it was time to stop trying so hard. I started making a mental list of ways to reclaim my peace without being outright rude. It wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't keep living like this. Update 1. Kai? The first step I took was simple. I stopped initiating contact with Andrew's family. For years, I had been the one sending messages, asking about their lives, and organizing visits. This time, I decided to see what would happen if I stopped. Unsurprisingly, the silence was deafening. Days turned into weeks without a single message or call. It was clear that maintaining the relationship had always been a one-way street. When holidays rolled around, I made another change. Andrew's family had gotten used to us hosting gatherings at our house, but I decided I was done playing hostess. When the topic of Easter came up, I casually mentioned to Andrew that I wasn't interested in hosting this year. He was surprised but agreed to handle it himself. When his family showed up, I greeted them politely, helped serve food, and then let Andrew take over everything else. By the end of the day, his mom was visibly annoyed, but I wasn't about to explain myself. The group chat was the next thing to shift. Andrew's family has this group chat where they share updates, plan events, and gossip about extended relatives. I had always tried to engage, sending cheerful replies and emojis, even when the conversation didn't interest me. This time I stopped participating altogether. I didn't leave the chat, I just let their messages pile up without responding. It didn't take long for someone to notice. One evening, Andrew mentioned that his sister had asked why I was being so quiet. I shrugged it off and changed the subject. Not long after, I heard through a friend that Andrew's family was planning a beach vacation. As usual, they didn't include me in the plans, and honestly, I didn't care. Instead of sulking, I decided to plan my own trip with a few close friends. We booked a cozy cabin in the mountains and spent a weekend hiking, cooking, and laughing until our stomachs hurt. I made sure to post plenty of pictures on social media, not to be petty, but to show that I was perfectly capable of enjoying my life without their approval. The next family dinner was another turning point. Andrew's parents invited us over and I decided to take a backseat. Normally, I'd try to steer conversations, engage with everyone, and keep things flowing. This time, I stayed polite but distant, letting Andrew take the lead. When his mom brought up Claire again, the ex-girlfriend they can't seem to let go of, I didn't bite. I sipped my drink, nodded along, and redirected my focus to my plate. By the end of the night, I could tell Andrew was frustrated, but he didn't say anything. Then came his dad's birthday. For years, I had gone out of my way to pick thoughtful, personalized gifts for his parents. This time, I forgot. We showed up with a card Andrew had picked out, and that was it. His mom made a comment about how I always used to bring such lovely gifts, but I just smiled and changed the subject. Andrew didn't even notice. The hints from his mom started shortly after. She casually mentioned how nice it would be if someone planned a 4th of July barbecue this year. I pretended not to hear her. When she repeated herself, I smiled and said, "That does sound nice." Then I turned back to my conversation with Andrew's dad. The silence that followed was awkward, but I didn't let it bother me. Even when they asked me direct questions, I kept my answers short and neutral. How's work? Got a simple busy, but good. Any plans for the weekend? Was met with not sure yet. It wasn't rude, but it was clear that I wasn't going to engage beyond the basics. It didn't take long for Andrew to notice. One night, he brought it up, saying his family had mentioned I seemed standoffish lately. I pointed out that I wasn't doing anything different from what they'd been doing to me for years. He didn't have much to say to that. To drive the point home, I started praising my own family more often. At one dinner, when his mom made another passive-aggressive comment about how her family does everything together, I casually mentioned how much I loved how welcoming my parents were. "They're always so excited to include everyone," I said, smiling. The tension at the table was palpable. As invitations rolled in, I started saying no. "Sorry, we can't make it this weekend" became my go-to response, and I didn't bother explaining further. Instead, I spent my time focusing on things that made me happy, spending time with my family, hanging out with friends, or just relaxing at home. The guilt tripping eventually started, but it wasn't directed at me. Andrew's mom began calling him, complaining about how distant I'd become, and how it was hurting the family. For once, Andrew didn't immediately take their side. He started noticing how often they excluded me, or made comments that were clearly meant to undermine me. One of their family friends even mentioned to Andrew that it seemed like his parents were harder on me than anyone else. Finally, Andrew admitted that his family's behavior was problematic. He struggled to know how to confront them, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. Update 2. A few weeks after my quiet protest began, I decided to host a small dinner party, but this time I made a point of doing things differently. Instead of inviting Andrew's entire family as usual, I kept the guest list selective. My parents, siblings, and a couple of Andrew's extended family members who had always been kind to me were invited. Andrew's parents were included, but not as VIPs. They got the same last-minute, casual invitation I'd usually get for their gatherings. The dinner itself was simple but warm. I cooked a spread of dishes, and everyone complimented how cozy and fun it felt. Andrew's parents arrived a bit late, looking surprised to see my family already settled and chatting comfortably. I greeted them politely but didn't go out of my way to make them feel like the center of attention. Andrew seemed to notice but didn't say anything. Throughout the night, his mom kept glancing around, probably wondering why the usual crowd wasn't there. When one of Andrew's cousins mentioned how much they appreciated being included, his mom's tight smile spoke volumes. Around the same time, I started being more intentional with invitations. If there was an event I wanted to host or attend, I invited the family members I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, and left out those who made things difficult. Andrew's mom and dad weren't always on the list, and the ripple effect was immediate. A cousin mentioned to Andrew how strange it was that his parents hadn't been invited to a family brunch. Andrew relayed it to me, but I simply shrugged. I wanted to keep it small, I explained, which was true. Meanwhile, Andrew started stepping up. During a family lunch, his mom made another jab about me not contributing enough to family traditions. This time, instead of staying silent, Andrew jumped in. He calmly pointed out that I'd organized plenty of gatherings and made efforts they didn't acknowledge. His mom's face turned red, and she quickly changed the subject. It wasn't a big blowout, but it was a shift. Andrew was finally defending me in front of them. My approach to gifts also changed. For years, I'd put a lot of effort into picking thoughtful gifts for Andrew's family, but I realized it was never reciprocated. So for his mom's birthday, I picked out a generic candle and card, nothing rude, just not my usual over-the-top effort. Meanwhile, for Andrew's cousin, who had always been kind to me, I put together a personalized gift basket. When the cousin gushed about it in front of everyone, Andrew's mom looked noticeably unimpressed. At family gatherings, I kept my distance from Andrew's parents. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't overly friendly either. Instead, I focused on catching up with other relatives, greeting them warmly, and making them feel valued. By contrast, my interactions with Andrew's parents were polite but brief. His mom tried to draw me into conversations, but I kept my responses neutral and short. After a while, she gave up. The baby talk kept cropping up, especially from Andrew's mom. She'd drop hints about how much she couldn't wait to be a grandmother. This time, I deflected. "Well, that's really up to Andrew, isn't it?" I said lightly, redirecting the spotlight onto him. Andrew, caught off guard, awkwardly laughed and changed the subject. His mom looked flustered, but I let the moment pass. One of the biggest surprises came during a family potluck. I decided to bake a dessert from scratch, something simple but impressive. By the end of the night, several family members were raving about it. Andrew's mom, who usually brought the standout dish, seemed annoyed when her casserole didn't get the usual praise. I didn't gloat or draw attention to it, but the shift in attention was hard to miss. I also started reclaiming my identity. For years, Andrew's family had insisted on using his last name for me, despite my choice to keep my maiden name. I began signing cards and RSVPs with my own name. It was subtle but effective. At one point, Andrew's mom held up a card I'd signed and asked, "Did you forget something?" I just smiled and said, "Nope, that's my name." On social media, I leaned into sharing stories about my own family. I posted pictures of dinners with my parents, celebrations with my siblings, and sweet moments with my nieces and nephews. The captions highlighted how supportive and welcoming my family was, without directly mentioning Andrew's. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. Andrew finally started piecing it all together. One night, he admitted he hadn't realized how much effort I'd put into fitting in with his family. "I didn't see it before, but it's not fair," he said. I could tell he felt guilty, but I didn't dwell on it. I just reminded him that change needed to come from both of us. The next family gathering was when things boiled over. Andrew's mom accused me of dividing the family. This time, Andrew stood firm. He pointed out that the division had been there long before I came along, and that I'd spent years trying to bridge the gap. Other family members, who had started noticing the dynamic, began chiming in. By the end of the night, Andrew's mom stormed off, leaving everyone in awkward silence. The fallout was both messy and revealing. Some relatives reached out privately, offering their support. A few even admitted they'd noticed how I'd been treated but hadn't wanted to get involved. Andrew and I agreed to hold our ground, waiting to see if his family would take the hint or escalate the conflict further. Update 3. The fallout started when Andrew's mom decided it was time for a family meeting. She called Andrew one evening, insisting that everyone needed to come together to resolve the tension. Andrew relayed the message to me hesitantly, knowing I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Still, I agreed, figuring it was better to get everything out in the open. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at Andrew's parents' house. When we arrived, the tension was already thick. Andrew's mom had arranged the seating like it was a courtroom, with her and Andrew's dad on one side and us on the other. Andrew's siblings were scattered in between, clearly uncomfortable but trying to look neutral. The meeting started with Andrew's mom jumping straight into accusations. She claimed I'd been distant, passive-aggressive, and had created a divide in the family. She listed examples: not engaging in the group chat, excluding them from events, and not showing the same level of enthusiasm I used to. Her tone made it clear she thought I was deliberately sabotaging family harmony. I stayed calm and simply started listing my own examples. I pointed out how they'd excluded me from vacations, ignored my preferences during our wedding, and constantly compared me to Andrew's ex. I reminded them of the countless times they'd addressed me by the wrong name or undermined my decisions. I wasn't harsh, just factual, but the room grew noticeably quieter with each example. Andrew's mom immediately went into denial mode. She claimed she had only ever tried to help and didn't realize any of it had upset me. She deflected most of my points, insisting they were misunderstandings or things I'd blown out of proportion. At one point, she said, "I didn't even know you felt this way," which made Andrew visibly tense. That's when Andrew stepped in. For the first time, he spoke up clearly and firmly, confirming everything I'd said. He called out the patterns of exclusion and passive-aggressive comments, saying they'd been going on for years. He told them he'd been trying to keep the peace, but it was obvious that approach wasn't working anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew's mom's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She started crying, accusing Andrew of betraying the family by taking my side. She claimed she'd always done her best to welcome me and couldn't understand why I was trying to turn him against her. It was a full-blown emotional meltdown, complete with accusations of ungratefulness and vague mentions of everything she'd done for us. Andrew's dad tried to mediate, telling her to calm down and suggesting that maybe there was some truth to what I'd said. That only made things worse. Andrew's mom shot him a glare that could have melted steel and accused him of choosing outsiders over family. At that point, one of Andrew's siblings chimed in, saying they thought I had a point and that the family hadn't always treated me fairly. The other sibling quickly jumped to their mom's defense, insisting I was overreacting and trying to stir up drama. The room erupted into a chaotic back and forth. Andrew's mom eventually stormed out, yelling over her shoulder that she was done trying and wouldn't waste her energy on someone who didn't appreciate her. The rest of us sat there awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. Andrew's dad apologized quietly and said he'd try to talk to her later. After the meeting, Andrew and I went home and processed everything. Andrew admitted he should have defended me sooner but explained that he'd been afraid of losing his parents' approval. I didn't rub it in or say I told you so. It was clear he was already beating himself up about it. The fallout didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Andrew's mom took to social media, posting vague but obviously targeted messages about entitled people and those who divide families instead of building them. She didn't name names, but it was clear who she was talking about. I didn't respond or engage, but a few extended family members reached out, asking for our side of the story. I stuck to the facts and left it at that. The final blow came when Andrew's mom declared that she wouldn't attend any events hosted by me unless I apologized. Andrew and I talked it over and agreed we weren't going to bend on our boundaries. If she wanted to throw a tantrum, that was her choice, but we weren't going to cater to it. Despite the drama, there were small silver linings. A few family members reached out to show support, saying they'd noticed the way I'd been treated and appreciated how calmly I'd handled things. Andrew's dad even called privately to apologize for his wife's behavior, though he admitted he didn't know how to fix things. Andrew and I decided to focus on maintaining our boundaries and moving forward on our terms. Whether his mom came around or not was up to her, but we weren't going to sacrifice our peace anymore. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. Update 4. A week after the family meeting fiasco, Andrew's dad reached out privately. He called to apologize for how I'd been treated, admitting he hadn't realized the extent of the issue until the meeting. He told me he'd been reflecting on everything and wanted to acknowledge that things needed to change. I accepted his apology but made it clear that words weren't enough. Actions would matter more moving forward. Shortly after, Andrew's supportive sibling took on the role of mediator. They reached out separately to check in and said they were trying to help their mom see my perspective. While I appreciated the effort, it was clear Andrew's mom wasn't ready to admit fault. Still, she surprised everyone by showing up at a family barbecue we'd planned to celebrate Andrew's birthday. Her presence was unexpected, but she kept her distance, only engaging with those who approached her. It wasn't an olive branch, but it was a start. Andrew stepped up again at the barbecue, taking a firm stance when his mom made a passive-aggressive comment about how family used to be closer. Without hesitation, he responded that closeness only works when everyone feels included and respected. The conversation shifted quickly after that, but the message was clear: he wasn't going to let her undermine me anymore. A few weeks later, Andrew and I hosted our first ever Friendsgiving. We invited a mix of close friends and family, including my parents and some of Andrew's extended relatives. His mom and dad were invited, but they declined. The event was a huge success. Everyone pitched in with food and drinks, and the atmosphere was light and fun. My parents spent time chatting with Andrew's cousins, who openly praised how welcoming and laid-back the gathering felt. Pictures from the night made their way onto social media, showing a vibrant, happy group enjoying each other's company. It felt like a turning point, proof that we could create our own traditions and find joy outside the drama. The next family gathering brought another test. Andrew's mom attended, but her attitude hadn't changed much. She made a few snide remarks about how I'd separated Andrew from his family traditions, but this time, Andrew didn't let it slide. He calmly reminded her that no one was being separated, just that we were balancing things better. The conversation didn't escalate, but her annoyance was visible. I stayed polite, refusing to engage in the back and forth. Other family members noticed the shift. At one point, Andrew's cousin complimented how I'd handled everything so far, even pointing out how hard it must have been to keep my cool. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged the effort I'd been putting in, and it felt validating. Andrew's mom overheard and didn't look thrilled, but she didn't say anything. Around this time, Andrew floated the idea of family counseling. He thought it might help address the deeper issues between his mom and me, as well as her struggles with letting go of control. Unsurprisingly, she refused, calling it unnecessary and dramatic. Still, Andrew's dad seemed open to the idea, which gave me hope that progress could happen in other ways. Andrew's dad also started stepping in more often when his wife's behavior crossed a line. At one family dinner, she made a veiled comment about how hard it must be for Andrew to juggle family and marriage. Andrew's dad quickly redirected the conversation, diffusing the tension. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it showed he was trying to mediate more actively. The sibling who had initially defended Andrew's mom also started coming around. They admitted privately that they hadn't realized how much I'd been excluded over the years, and that hearing my perspective during the meeting had been eye-opening. It was a small shift, but it felt meaningful. Andrew's mom, while still resistant, began making small efforts to be more inclusive. She started inviting me to events directly instead of going through Andrew, though her tone remained begrudging. At one family brunch, she even asked for my input on a seating arrangement, which was a first. It wasn't warm or enthusiastic, but it was something. The real breakthrough came at a large family event hosted by one of Andrew's cousins. Toward the end of the night, Andrew's mom needed help organizing some last-minute details. I stepped in to assist, quietly ensuring everything was handled smoothly. Later, in front of a group of relatives, she thanked me. It was a simple "I appreciate your help," but coming from her, it felt monumental. The room went quiet for a moment, and Andrew squeezed my hand under the table. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was the first public acknowledgement of my contributions. By the time the night ended, Andrew and I agreed that things were improving, even if slowly. We knew his mom still had a long way to go, but the small victories were enough to keep us optimistic. We also agreed to remain vigilant about our boundaries, knowing how quickly things could regress. Looking back, it felt like we were finally turning a corner. The tension wasn't gone, but it was no longer the elephant in the room. For the first time in years, I felt like progress, however small, was being made. Update 5. Last month, Andrew and I celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary with a private getaway to a lakeside cabin. It was quiet, just the two of us, with no distractions or family drama. As we toasted marshmallows by the fire, Andrew thanked me for sticking with him through everything. He admitted he hadn't realized how much I'd endured until things started changing. It was a small moment, but a meaningful one, a reminder of how far we'd come as a team. Back home, the dynamic with Andrew's family had shifted significantly. While my mother-in-law wasn't perfect, far from it, her behavior had noticeably improved. She'd started making an effort to include me in conversations and even invited me to a lunch with a few family members. While it wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy, it was a step towards civility. At family gatherings, her comments were less cutting, and she seemed to think before speaking. I noticed she'd stopped mentioning Andrew's ex entirely, which was a huge relief. Andrew's supportive sibling and I grew closer as well. They'd become a quiet ally, often stepping in to support me during family discussions. At one gathering, when a relative joked about my decision to keep my maiden name, the sibling quickly pointed out how common and normal that choice was these days. It was a small but affirming gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Andrew's dad continued to act as a mediator. Whenever my mother-in-law seemed on the verge of making a snide remark, he'd redirect the conversation smoothly. During a recent dinner, he even complimented me on a dessert I brought, steering the conversation toward lighter topics. It was clear he was doing his best to keep the peace without picking sides. One of the most surprising turns came when Andrew and I decided to try couples counseling. We wanted to make sure we were on the same page moving forward, especially with all the baggage from the past few years. The sessions were eye-opening. They helped us both process what had happened and gave us tools to communicate more effectively. Andrew told me he felt like he'd finally learned how to prioritize our marriage without feeling guilty about his family. It was a breakthrough for both of us. Holidays, once a source of constant tension, became more balanced. Andrew and I started alternating holidays between our families, a decision we both felt good about. Last Christmas, we spent the morning with his family and the evening with mine, which went smoother than I'd expected. My mother-in-law kept her comments to herself, and Andrew's dad made sure the day stayed light and cheerful. It felt like a win for everyone. Even social media, once a battleground for passive-aggressive posts, had quieted down. My mother-in-law stopped posting vague complaints about certain people and shifted to sharing pictures of her garden and family pets. It seemed like she'd finally realized that public airing of grievances wasn't helping her case. Extended family members, meanwhile, began reaching out to express their support. I received a few messages from relatives thanking me for standing up for myself and setting a good example. The changes weren't just about boundaries, though. They were about setting a new standard for how relationships in the family could work. Andrew and I made a point of modeling healthy dynamics, showing that mutual respect and open communication were non-negotiable. Slowly but surely, it seemed to be catching on. Other family members started speaking up more when something felt unfair, and the atmosphere at gatherings grew less tense. Through it all, Andrew remained my biggest cheerleader. He'd often thank me for the effort I'd put into building a bridge with his family, even when it felt like they were meeting me halfway at best. He also made sure I knew how much he appreciated the sacrifices I'd made early on and promised to do better in the future. His gratitude was genuine, and it made me feel like we'd truly turned a corner in our marriage. My mother-in-law, while still reluctant to outright apologize, began treating me with more respect. At one large family dinner, she even asked for my opinion on a vacation idea she was planning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that she was starting to see me as part of the family. It felt like a small victory, one that came not from forcing the issue but from standing firm in my boundaries. Looking back, the journey has been anything but easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when the weight of it all felt too heavy to carry. But standing up for myself, and having Andrew stand with me, made all the difference. It reshaped not just my relationship with his family but also our marriage. We became stronger together, more united, and more confident in the life we were building. If there's one thing I've learned, it's the power of self-advocacy. Setting boundaries isn't easy, especially with family, but it's essential for your well-being. If you're in a similar situation, I hope this story encourages you to stand your ground. It's not always about winning. Sometimes it's about creating space for mutual respect and growth. Today, our family dynamics aren't perfect, but they're better. And that's enough for now.